Good day everyone, Thabang here. Welcome to the very first episode of Careers Podcast for SA. What you can expect over the next couple of weeks is riveting conversations with different professionals from all walks of life who should continue watching. If you're interested in studying something that we're speaking about, if you're already within a job but are interested in what other people are doing, or if you're in university and are wondering what is required of you on a day-to-day basis, then you should definitely continue watching. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about geology. The reason why this episode is particularly interesting is that I've got with me today three geologists that I studied with at the University of Pretoria. We all studied at the same time, but we're all doing different careers. We're all doing different areas of geology, and I think it's very interesting to know that even though you study a particular degree, you're not necessarily locked up within a particular line of career. So the quartet of us will now run you through what it takes to be a geologist, what exactly we do on the day-to-day. Without much further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our guest today. Marvin, Moroeng, Odai, Kgomongwe, and Khulekani, Nhlanhla. Hi guys.
Hi, lovely to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to be here, guys. I think it'll be really good to run everyone through just an introduction of who you are, a bit of background. We can start on the left with Marvin.
So my name is Marvin Moroeng. I grew up in a small village outside of Zeerust, and then went to school there from primary up to high school, and then went and studied geology at the University of Pretoria, as Thabang mentioned. And then after I finished our honours, I then did my master's and then did my PhD thereafter, and then I currently work as a lecturer and researcher.
Yeah. Thank you. Odai?
Hi, my name is Odai Kgomongwe. I was born and bred in a small town in Limpopo, which hosts the world's largest platinum producer. And I studied there. I did my primary school in that small town. I did my high school in Polokwane. And then I moved on to study geology at the University of Pretoria. I then went into industry for a while and then went back to study my master's in hydrogeology. And yeah, that's a brief story of me.
Awesome. Khulekani?
Cool. Hi guys, Thabang. Name is Khulekani. As Thabang has mentioned, my surname is Nhlanhla. So a lot of people say that I don't have a surname because my surname is actually a first name.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found that very cool. So I was born and raised in a small area called Mahlafunya, just outside Brett Sound in the Northwest Province. After finishing my matric, decided to go and do geology for interesting reasons, which maybe I'll mention later if I do get the chance. After studying my degree, just went into industry, and that's where I've been since.
Yeah. So I think a question that a lot of people ask a lot of the time is, what is geology? Because every time I've told people that I'm a geologist, they never quite know exactly where to fit me in. So what's the simplest explanation of geology that you guys can think of? If you're talking to someone in high school asking you, what is geology? Anyone can answer that.
I think if you were to Google geology now, it would probably tell you something about the study of rocks.
Yeah.
And it is, that is the simplest explanation, but also probably the truest explanation. It is studying rocks. For different reasons. Most of the commodities that we use in our everyday lives actually come from rocks. In one way or the other, they come associated with different types of rocks, and therefore you need to be able to take specific materials from the rocks in order to be, depending on what you want to use them for, depending on what material we are taking out of the rock. So primarily we study rocks for that reason, what is typically termed economic geology.
Yeah.
So, and another reason for studying rocks is to understand, I think depending on who you are at least, to sort of get an understanding of where humans and their evolution has been like. Rocks contain a lot of information regarding how our Earth has changed through time.
Yeah, I think that's a good enough explanation. And I think maybe this next one I'll back to you, Odai. But normally when you first decide what degree you're going to study, you're 18 years old. And I think that normally makes people feel like, you know, you're getting trapped into something very early on because you're making a decision that affects the rest of your life while you're very young. But like I said, what's good here is that we've got an example of how, you know, when you've studied that one degree between 4 people, we still got to go in different paths. But I think what I want to know from you is personally, what made you choose geology when it was time for you to make the decision?
Interesting story. My first year at varsity, I didn't study geology. I studied biological science, and biological science is what medical students do in their first year of university. So I did that, and it came second semester, and I did a module called genetics, and I realized this is not what I envisioned doing for the rest of my life. And then I did an eeny, meeny, miny, mo decision, believe it or not, through the faculty's book with various courses, and geology was one of them. And with hindsight, I realized when I joined the dots that it wasn't just an eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I gravitated towards geology because of my love for history. Geology has a lot of history in it, in that we study the earth. The earth reveals what happened over millions of years ago. So with that in mind, I think my love for history and geology were kind of merged there. So
yeah,
that led me to geology.
Cooks, would you like to take a bet?
I just want to try to put a cool spin onto, you know, what geology is. So from my end of the spectrum as a consultant in the industry, you know, I'll get into it a bit later. I see geology as, so before even trying to understand what geology is, I look at the end product of geology. It's products like your cell phones, electric cars today, they use cobalt. Cobalt needs to be mined out of the earth. So the everyday material that we see today, the technology that we see today, is actually, you know, fed by geology in essence, you know. So I think in studying geology, trying to study what the world is today, or where you actually trying to study where the world came from, or where the everyday tech that you see today came from. Yeah. In terms of why I chose geology, like I said, I grew up in a small town called Brett. So in the town, there's a mining area, not a mining area, there's a smelter and mine owned by, I think, a company called Hernick Ferrochrome. That company is under a business rescue now. So currently it's owned by, I think, a company called Samanco Chrome, if I'm not mistaken. So as I was growing up, in the area there are 2 towers. You know, one of the towers has a fire that's continuously on. You know, in a smelter, the fire needs to keep going all the time. And in the area being dark, you know, that place was always lit, and you know, there were lights all the time. And for me, those lights represented, you know, hope and a future as well, and a bright future. So after matriculating, it became pretty obvious for me what I needed to study. It was something that was going to lead me towards, you know, going back to that area and working for that area. But yeah, we'll touch on that a bit later on again.
Yeah, I think before I get into what you guys do on the, you know, on a day-to-day basis, just to see the differences, I'll also say that my story is pretty similar to yours, in that I also grew up in a small village, and you know, as Odai said, because we grew up in a, you know, not too far from each other, I'd say, probably the same platinum mine was visible to us in terms of it being the biggest platinum mine in the world. But yeah, so when I grew up, because the area was, you know, not lit, there wasn't much electricity. Not lit, sorry. All you would see were the mine lights from where we stayed, and I think you knew that, you know, there was a lot of activity there. The lights were always on throughout the night, cars kept going back and forth, and I think that inspired me to say, how do I get myself to become a part of that circle? And I think another very, very poverty-driven reason, which I think a lot of people make decisions on, is it also looked like it would give me the funds that I needed, you know, to help propel my family forward. And I think, you know, beyond just good reasons, I went after it because I was looking for financial freedom. Yeah, and I think looking back now, it wasn't a bad decision. But I think on that, you know, when we start talking about particular jobs and what it takes, I know that a lot of people think about doing something like geology, but don't quite know what am I supposed to do on a day-to-day basis? Is it answering emails? Is it picking up rocks? So I want to know from each and every one of you, what is it that your everyday entails, your week entails, your month entails? You can keep it brief, but just try to cover a spectrum of what is it that your work actually entails. We can start with Marvin again and move towards this way.
So as I've mentioned, I work as a lecturer and as a researcher for the University of Johannesburg. My job has changed, I think, since I started at UJ in 2016 as an assistant lecturer, and then I became lecturer towards the end of 2018, I think, if I'm not mistaken, after I completed my PhD. And so I think when I started there, it was the first year, I think, it was just trying to get my bearings when it came to the teaching, especially trying to put a module together, which is a bit daunting. And then from there, it was then trying to, once the module was set, it was then trying to push my PhD, which then happened, I think, over the next couple of years. So it was, for the first 3 years or so, it was teaching and then it was my PhD. I almost refused to do anything else aside from those two things. And then, after I completed my PhD, then you start having to supervise postgraduate students, masters and PhD. I had done honors before, but I hadn't taken on masters and PhD students, just because I needed to dedicate that time to my PhD. So, on a day-to-day basis, I teach 7 weeks in a year. So a lot of my time is actually, I'm supposed to be doing research with it. And then on a daily basis, it's meetings with students, and then students admin, trying to get them funding, trying to sort out their registrations, and you end up sort of being involved in their lives and all the problems that they are having. So there is a bit of that as well. But what I also try to do is research. That is related to my students, but there's some things that I'm doing on my own independently. And then I'm also working with people in China and in Australia, trying to do people I'm collaborating with, if you will, that I'm working with, collaborating with in research. So that is basically my life really is a lot of reading, a lot of writing, both stuff that I'm preparing, but stuff that students are submitting or will be submitting. And then for the 7 weeks in a year, my life then is completely taken over when I teach undergrad.
Thank you. Odai?
I'm a hydrogeologist. So I moved from geology to hydrogeology. So I'm going to speak about two parts of my job. I'm also a groundwater modeler. So a life in a day of a groundwater modeler, you spend a lot of time in front of a computer, so that you'll deal extensively with data. So you need to understand your data and study it very carefully. From that data, you are then able to derive a conceptual model of whatever is happening at a particular site. And from that conceptual model, you then use that to then build your groundwater model to try simulate whatever conditions you may want to simulate. An example would be there's a rural village, and the municipality there is trying to establish a groundwater supply to supply them with water. So in a groundwater model, we'll collect that data, study it, have a conceptual model, and try, if the objective of the municipality is how long can you keep pumping groundwater from this area to this community. So we'll run simulation and tell them you can pump it at this rate over this duration for 10 years. You'll still be able to have water at that rate, pumping it at a particular rate for whatever period that is. And also give them limitations that should you exceed this rate, you may not reach your sustainability on how long you intend on using the water or supplying your community. And the other aspect would be in the mining environment, when they need to assess and plan for their underground mining activities or even open cast mining activities. So in your underground mines, before they mine into a particular area, they would need to understand the groundwater inflows that they may encounter there, to plan for whatever pumps they need to install there and to plan accordingly. So that's two examples of how groundwater modeling then comes into our day-to-day life. And the other aspect is the physical hydrogeology, where it's not office-based. You go into the field, you do the actual testing in the field. We use boreholes to try and understand what's happening underground in the groundwater system. So we run several tests to try and understand how it behaves, and that's the data that we then bring into the office and study, that goes back into the model. So that's a day in the life of a hydrogeologist or a groundwater modeler.
Yeah.
Cool. So in my case, I'm a management and tech consultant. Work with a lot of mining clients. So on a day-to-day basis, what I do is interact and collaborate with clients to come up with technologies that optimize the different areas in the mining value chain. In my case, like I said, I focus mainly on technology, as well as not only business optimization, but then operations optimization. That's one area. Then another area is, so on a day-to-day basis, I run a team, a delivery team, that delivers different solutions to clients. Obviously, before doing any project, there has to be a proposal taken to a client. So I spend my time drafting proposals, doing pricing for that particular project as well. Also spend time trying to sell new work to clients as well. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what I do.
Yeah. And I guess from my side, I'm a project geologist. Ideally, what I like about my work is that projects have a beginning and an end, and I think from the beginning I always wanted the kind of work that I'd know where it started and I'd know where it ended, and I could sign it off and start something new. And I think I had to discover that when I started working. When I was doing routine work, I quickly realized that I lose a lot of enthusiasm. So I really needed to have an end goal in mind when I did work, and only when that was achieved would I be able to move on to something else. I think I won't necessarily get into my career journey, because I think with the number of podcasts that are still coming, I will touch on quite a few facets. But I think having spent a lot of time just getting into what is it that you guys do, I want to now use the lens to look at people that are interested, to get into geology, whether it's students or people that just want a career change. What kind of person do you think it takes to be a good geologist? And base it on the line of career that you're in. So what are the principles that you've realized, would make your life a lot easier if you had them when you got into this particular path? Maybe we can start with you, Cook.
So in my case, it would be asking questions that your peers are not asking, right? Because studying geology and doing what I do now, those two things are almost not related. But if you know how to connect the dots, and if you know how to ask the right questions, then it's possible. So I think ask the right questions and be willing to learn. Like in my case, I learn new things every day. Like I'm outside my comfort zone in what I do, guys. And so that takes a lot of learning. So be willing to learn and ask a lot of questions as well.
Odai?
I would say to be a good hydrogeologist or good scientist, you would need to be, one, curious, and two, you need to be also inquisitive, and thirdly, I would say you also need to be critical. If somebody brings something before you as a scientist, you need to be able to break it down and ask the right questions and not take it as gospel. So you need to interrogate stuff and ask why it is the way it is. So you need to be curious, inquisitive, and also critical.
I think I agree with everything that they've said. I think just to add something to that, maybe one thing. I think it's, so we, I think one of the most important things that I've learned over the last couple of years is that in order to be able to do this job, my job specifically, do it effectively, you need to be able to communicate to other people. It doesn't matter if you make the biggest discovery of the century of the millennia. If you cannot communicate it to another person, it doesn't matter, because then people don't know. You are then not able to communicate it to the next person what you found. So you need to have excellent communication skills, both written and spoken. You need to, I think there is a whole conversation right now that's going on about us as scientists in academia, specifically as researchers, not we being able to communicate with each other. Therefore, if I'm a coal petrologist, geochemist of sorts, and so I am able to speak coal language, and I'm able to speak to other people that understand that language. And I'm always finding that it's always very difficult for us, especially people that are that specialize in this very specific part of science, not even just geology, of all science, that we are able to communicate with each other. But if you're speaking to another scientist, not even just a layman, the people are not necessarily able to understand you, because the language is so specific. So you need to learn to be able to do it. It's not something that I think I'm already conversant in myself, being able to communicate my science to a general public, but I think that it is something that you have to be willing to do. Yeah. Especially in our context, because the taxpayers pay for the research that we do, and so they need to understand. If you say that you've published a paper, you need to be able to communicate it. Ideally, you should also be able to communicate it to the general public, to say that this is what I did, this is actually what I found, this is what it actually means for practical everyday things.
Yeah, and I think the last bit on that for me is within the project geology space, I think the most important value, or the most important personality trait you should have, is obviously curiosity, but this is more curiosity within other professions. I think what I've found is a lot of the time when we worked on projects, it takes a long time to try to come up with a solution. But when you go to medicine or when you go to construction, you find that they found something that does something that you've been working on years to solve. And I think a practical example is we need to break down rocks and look inside to see what exactly is within that rock. But the medical industry, I think from the I won't say the date because I might be wrong, but they've been doing x-rays for a very long time, and that allowed them to see within the human body and see if a bone was broken. And I think only in the last 10 or so years we've been x-raying rocks, where you can actually look within a core and see what's in there. But you can imagine if someone 30 years ago had thought of that thing that you're doing within medicine might actually work within geology, we would have come such a long way already. So a lot of the stuff that we do is still breaking ground to get to stuff, but there's ways to think about what have other industries done to be able to achieve what we're trying to do. And I think that's definitely over the last few years the skill that I've been trying to perfect, is just looking at what is everyone else doing outside geology, outside things that I'm seeing on the daily, and when you apply that, it normally makes your work a lot easier. I think the last question that I have for you guys, just to make it more human, not just geology, but what are you guys passionate about? So outside geology, what else is it that you guys get up to? When you're not working, what are you doing?
Goodness, passion, eh? So in my case, I'm developing a passion. It's also work, but work outside geology, right? So I've gotten into business, mainly logistics and property as well. Those have taken up a bit of my time over the past few months, I'd say. So I've also but last year I became a father, and that also takes up a lot of my time as well. So
Odai?
I am a member of Toastmasters. I'm currently the president of Mid-Rand Groundbreakers, so I'm passionate about Toastmasters and whatever outreach work we do in local communities to teach young kids about communication and leadership skills. And the other passion of mine is related to my field of work, which I'm currently doing. I'm a water advocate as well as a science communicator. So when I go back home, I go to primary schools preferably and high schools, and I try to break down science in a layman's language and try expose them to science and make it relatable, so it's not something out of their reach. And hopefully I hope to inspire them to enter the world of science and one day discover and do miraculous things for us.
It's difficult when you have a PhD.
I think that's a really difficult question. But I think something that I've discovered, I think over the last 2 years or so, is that I love traveling. I think, which is also a big part of my job. So I think that is the one thing that I really, really enjoy doing, aside from my job. The second thing, I think we are all trying to, as Odai mentioned, we are all trying to, in our small spaces, whenever I go home, there's the high school that I went to, I normally go there and have a conversation, very much such as this one, about what I do, about how a boy from a village in the northwest goes from that and to having a PhD, about exactly this kind of conversation, and then also trying to get students to, well, not even students, learners, to try and help them with applications, because sometimes it's not even a matter of the people can't or won't or are unwilling, it's just a lack of information. Information that is, I think, to you and me, to us, the information is just here, right? But to somebody else who data might be a problem for, who doesn't have as much of the exposure and of that, I think that becomes such an important part of what we do. Just to say to people, it's as easy as filling out an application. I can bring my laptop and help you do the application if you want.
Yeah, I think with that said, I'm going to leave an email across the screen somewhere. I'm not sure how to do that yet. But basically, if you send any queries to do with geology, I'll make sure that they're directed to the guys that have, so kindly given us that time. And I think, this will be the platform that we try to discuss as many careers as we can going forward. But I think definitely, as people on YouTube always say, like the video, subscribe. That way we know that it's useful and we need to make a lot more of these. And we'll try to do as many careers as we can, whether it be normal careers, crazy careers, anything that's possible to do, not just within South Africa, but we'll try to get as many people in to talk about what they do. And you can maybe find your new passion, something to get involved in. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. And to you guys, thank you very much for giving of your time. We appreciate all your input.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Thanks.